and you sit down and you want to order a hamburger. And so you sit there and the waiter comes up and you say, I'd like a hamburger, how much is it? And they say, oh, $100. That's a lot of money for a hamburger right now. Now, I just asked you guys how much you like hamburgers. I have a second question. How many of you would take that deal? How many of you would order the hamburger for $100? Okay, I think that's a joke. Yeah, I don't think anybody would order a hamburger for $100. Why not?
Not worth it.
Not worth it. Exactly, right? I can go down to, McDonald's or Burger King and get a hamburger for $5. Why would I pay $100 for a hamburger? When it comes to ordering food, we have a sense of value, right? We won't pay more than what something is worth. And we kind of take that and apply it to a lot of other things too. We have a sense of value for many things in life. We make decisions, we spend our time, we spend our money, and we have this sense of certain things being worth it and other things not being worth it. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what is valuable. And the question of value or what is valuable is important because we deal with values every day. So every day, we make decisions relating to value. We make financial decisions relating to value. We also make decisions just in life in general that deal with what the worth of things are. And most of the time, our values are invisible. Like, we don't see them. We're not even really aware of them half of the time. Half the time, or maybe most of the time, when we make decisions, how do we make decisions? We make them based on how we feel, right? We just kind of go based on feeling. So I'm not feeling it. I didn't get up early today. I'm not really feeling it, or I am feeling it, and I decided to do this. We make decisions based on how we feel, and the problem with that is that a lot of the time, if you are going based on feeling, that's not going to get you through the hard times. When you get into hard times, nobody feels good in those situations, and it's tough to make it through. We need to value the right things. That's true of just humans in general, but it's especially true of Christians. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to start by talking about what are values, and we're going to kind of unpack that. Then we're going to talk about what is most valuable. So the question of what is most valuable. And finally, I'm going to talk about how to pursue what is valuable. Let's start by talking about what are values, because we've been using that word here today a little bit. What do we mean by that? When you say you value something, you're basically saying this is worth it, right? So if I value a car, I'm thinking about getting a new car. When I do that, I'm going to say this car is worth probably a lot of money now, right? Because cars are very expensive now. Everything's very expensive now. When you value something, you say, this is worth it. And we do this with our time, right? We spend our time all kinds of different ways. All of you have so many hours in the week, and you decide to spend that in different ways. Your attention, you could be sitting down somewhere, and you might be paying attention to what's going on. You might not be. If you're like us, you might have your phone out and you're paying attention to that phone rather than the people or whatever is going on around you. Money is another thing. So money, we spend our money, we value things and we spend money. There's several truths about values, and we're going to kind of talk about those, and then I'm going to get to what Jesus kind of said about values here at the end of this. But for starters, values are a choice. You choose to value things. There is nobody that can tell you this is what you are going to value. You make that choice, and you make that choice every day. If you wanted to spend $100 on the hamburger, you could do that, right? Now that would not be a wise decision. I think most of us would say that. But I'm sure we all know people who have made unwise decisions with their money. Maybe we, at some point, have made unwise decisions with our money. You choose what you value. The question, what's it worth to you? You are the only one that can answer that. Values also have consequences. If you value the wrong thing, sometimes there can be a price to pay for that. In Matthew chapter 6, and this is the verse we just read here before the message, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, Jesus talks about this. And this is a part of the Sermon on the Mount, so a lot of people are familiar with the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talks about treasure here in these verses in Matthew 6. And in verse 19, he says, Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There will your heart be also. Jesus is talking about this idea that we've been kind of wrestling with here. And he's basically saying you can choose one of two ways. You can put your value, you can put your time, your effort, your soul in something that doesn't matter. And there's consequences for that. If you invest in the thing where the moth and the rust can destroy, where the thief can break in and steal, there's consequences for that. If you've ever had something stolen, you know what I mean by that. On the other hand, he encourages us to look to heaven, where neither moth nor rust can destroy it. And he says that's where you need to put your treasure. So we've talked about what values are. I'd like to kind of switch gears and talk about what is valuable. Because when we talk about valuing things, it's a choice. We all can choose what we value. But that kind of begs the question, what is worth valuing? What should we be putting our time, our money, our effort into? And there's many things in this life that aren't valuable. There's a lot of short-term pleasures out there that lead to destruction. I'm sure that many of us either know of people who have succumbed to some of those things, and by that I'm talking drugs, alcohol. I mean, we all know the list, right? There's many of us who know some of the people who have kind of succumbed to some of those things. Some of us maybe at some times have succumbed to some of those things ourselves, where we've chased something that isn't valuable. Just because somebody says something is valuable doesn't mean that it is. Just like the hamburger. Just because somebody wants to sell it to you for $100 doesn't mean that it's worth it. There's many things in life, however, that are valuable. And, I have a list here, like a car, a house. Those are pretty valuable possessions. And you start thinking a little more outside the box. Well, your job is pretty valuable, right? Your family is really valuable. If we were making a chart, if we were making a list, your family's probably going to be pretty high up at the top of that list. Your friends are valuable. And then there's other things that we consider valuable. The better question, though, rather than kind of focusing on making a whole list, is what is most valuable? What is most valuable? The answer to that question kind of depends on what you believe. If you are not a Christian, if you're just kind of part of the world, I guess we could say, you will have one answer to that question, or maybe a couple different answers to that question. If you're a Christian, on the other hand, hopefully you have a different answer. So we're going to kind of break that down. What are these two different approaches to the question of what is most valuable? What does the world say is most valuable? Money. Yeah, so there's money, we can think money, power, all these kind of pleasure, maybe, all these different kinds of things. And then if you kind of distill it down and you kind of think, well what do all those things have in common? I arrive at one thing that I think the world says is most valuable, more so than anything else. And that thing is happiness. The world says that being happy is the most important thing that you can do in your life. As a matter of fact, it's in the Declaration of Independence, right? So in the Declaration of Independence, it's life, liberty, and what? Pursuit of happiness. And I'm not against the Declaration of Independence, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not trying to do that. But happiness is something that we all seek. We all do it, even if we don't realize it. We're all after it. We seek it with money. We try to buy happiness, right? Like, well, this next car, that's going to make me happy. Or this house, I'm going to get that house. It's going to be just exactly like I like it. That's going to make me happy. We seek it in careers. So, when you're younger, I remember when I was going to college, there's a lot of thought on what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And people ask you, well, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I feel like I still don't know that answer, honestly. We seek happiness, though, from our careers. We also seek it in our relationships. And there's a lot of people that hop around from relationship to relationship, from marriage to marriage, and they're just looking for that other person who's going to do what? Make them happy. How does that work out? There's a biblical perspective on this. So there's a guy called Solomon. Many of you may know Solomon. Solomon was the son of a guy named David, who was the king of Israel. And David was a really good king, and he had built up Israel. Israel was a pretty, powerful nation by the time David got done with it. And so Solomon takes over, and he inherits this great kingdom, and he expands it even. It gets even more grand and wealthy and great than it was before. And if you read about Solomon, it's kind of interesting because Solomon, I think the wealth and the success gets to him a little bit. There's all kinds of ways he kind of goes off the rails. But Solomon writes this book called Ecclesiastes. At least it's implied that Solomon wrote the book. It doesn't say Solomon, but if you read certain things, everybody pretty much thinks Solomon is the author. And in Ecclesiastes, Solomon kind of has a lot of wisdom or a lot of thoughts on this pursuit of happiness and where it leads to. And Ecclesiastes is kind of I don't know, would you call it a depressing book? It's kind of different than all the other books. For some reason, I kind of like Ecclesiastes. I don't know why. Maybe that says something about me, but I kind of enjoy Ecclesiastes. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, Solomon kind of gives his take on this whole attempt at gaining happiness that we've been talking about. And in verse 9, he says, "So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor." All the stuff that I wanted to do, I was able to do it, and I got the reward for it. "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun." Solomon was probably more successful than you and I are going to be. I think that's safe to say. He's a king, for one. I don't know of any kings or queens out there. He had all the wealth. He had all of the stuff that you could imagine that anyone would ever want. Solomon got to the top of that mountain. And you know what he found when he got there? That there was nothing there. He did everything that he wanted to do. And he said, it's all vanity. What does it mean to be vain? It means that it's meaningless. It's for nothing. The world says that happiness is the most valuable thing. I think Solomon would beg to differ. What else does the world say is most valuable? So if we've kind of dealt with the happiness side of things, and to be clear, I'm not against happiness. I don't want you thinking that. But Solomon kind of has a perspective on it. But if we take happiness aside, what else does the world say is most valuable? Yourself, yeah. Life itself is something that the world would say, that is the most valuable thing. If I can't be happy, at least I'm alive. We will sacrifice anything to hang on to our lives. That's true, of people. It's true, you see it in animals. Animals try to survive no matter what. And it's understandable, in a way. I don't think any of us would say, I want to throw away my life. We don't want to see other people throwing away their lives. I think we understand this, especially now. We've spent the last 2 years going through what? We've been going through the whole COVID crisis. And what is the single core issue that's at the core of that? It's death, right? And we've faced illness, we faced death, we faced masks, quarantines, vaccine mandates. There's been all kinds of stuff that's been going on. And I think it's safe to say it's kind of taken over our lives. I mean, how many of you feel like your life is radically different than it was 2 years ago? Some of you are raising your hands, but I think most of us would probably agree with that. And we've sacrificed a lot during that time. We sacrificed each other in a couple different ways. Number one, we've not seen each other. We've been apart for a long, long time, and there's consequences to that. We've also sacrificed each other in that we're at odds. There's families that are divided now because of all this COVID stuff. We've sacrificed our jobs. Some people have had to walk away from their jobs because of different policies, or they've had to maybe go to working from home. We've sacrificed our children, the younger generation. We basically told children, you don't need to go to school. You don't need to see other people. You don't need to see people's faces. Just stay at home. Just isolate. We sacrificed a lot of things over the last couple of years. And there's conversations to be had with all of that. But the core issue throughout all of this stuff has been that we are afraid to die. It's been that we're afraid to die. And that's understandable. It's understandable. However, I would ask a question. Have we lost our way? Is life the most valuable thing that we have? Jesus kind of had a perspective on this, just like I quoted from Solomon. I'm going to quote from Jesus. In Matthew chapter 16, I'm going to read 25 and 26. So we read 24 and 25, so I made a major jump. I went from 25 to 26 for this week. Matthew 16, verse 25. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is a man profited if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? According to Jesus, your life is not the most valuable thing that you possess. Your soul is. And if you fight tooth and nail to hang onto your life, and many of us do, and I completely understand that. I would. I don't want to die. I don't know about you. But if you fight tooth and nail, if you do everything in your power, guess what? You're going to lose your life. We're all going to die at some point. We need something more than just this life. So that's what the world says is most valuable. Happiness, life itself. What do Christians, or what does Christianity say is most valuable? And you can make a long list of things, but I think everyone would agree that the number one thing on that list of what is most valuable, according to Christianity, would be what? It would be God, right? God is the most valuable thing in the universe. And some people kind of distort this. There's a lot of talk in the Bible about God's glory, different things. And people will say, well, God's a narcissist, or God is he's very selfish. He only cares about himself. He's the ego, right? And that's not true at all. It's simply a fact. God is the most important thing in this entire universe. God is the creator of the universe. We would not be here if it were not for God. So by default, just without doing anything else, God is the most valuable thing that we could ever imagine. Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then in John, he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. So God is at the top. And for Christians, God is where all of our value comes from. And the Bible is full of God's thoughts on what is valuable, on what is worth it, what is right, what is wrong, what's true, what's false. Now, what does God say is most valuable? We can make a long list of what God cares about. The Bible is full of it. But I would say somewhere at the top of that list, there's one thing that God considers valuable more than anything. And I would say that one thing, what does God consider most valuable? One of those things at the top of that list is you. God considers you to be very, incredibly valuable. Why do I say that? Well, in John 3:16, we quoted from it last week, and I don't know if it's on the slide, but John 3:16, many of us know it by heart, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Did I get it right? Because I can't say we know it by heart and then I mess it up, right? God paid the highest price when he sacrificed himself for you. Jesus is God, right? So there's this whole, there's the Son, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and it's kind of, it's something that we wrestle with. But basically, God sacrificed himself. And if God is the most valuable thing, and the most valuable thing sacrificed itself for you, what does that mean? It means you're really, really valuable, right? He paid a lot of money for you, so to speak. If we had a price tag, when you go out to shop, any of you guys like to shop and you're looking at clothes and it's like you pick up the thing and it's like, oh, that's $50, I'll put that back, I don't want that. And we look at price tags all the time. Imagine we all have a price tag. What would be on that price tag? I would submit to you that price tag would have a dollar sign and it would have an infinity symbol on it. Because God sacrificed himself for you. He paid that money, that price for you. So when it comes to what's most valuable, you can choose the world's version of that, the world's value system. I'm presenting to you today the Christian version of that. And when it comes to what is most valuable, choose carefully, because there are consequences for what you value. We talked about what values are, we've talked about what is valuable. I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about how to pursue what is most valuable. And our example for this is Jesus. So it seems like it's kind of a broken record, and I guess it kind of is, but it's also true because Jesus showed us the way. In Hebrews chapter 12, so Hebrews 11 is something for those of you who are familiar with the Bible. Hebrews 11 is kind of a cool chapter because it's this kind of recap of the Old Testament, and the writer of Hebrews, some think it's Paul, I think Mick, you think it's Paul, right? The writer of Hebrews says that all of these people in the Old Testament, they lived by faith, and he gives examples of how these people lived by faith. And in Hebrews 12, it picks up right after this whole list, and it's a very cool chapter. I encourage you to read it. But in Hebrews 12, verse 1, wherefore, because of what happened before, wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. The writer of Hebrews says, look to Jesus. When you're talking about faith and living and everything, look to Jesus. So when we're talking about what is valuable and how we pursue what is most valuable, I'd say it's a good idea. Let's look to Jesus. How did Jesus pursue what is most valuable? And there's two things you can take. I mean, you can probably take a lot of things, but there's two things that I kind of latched onto from those verses as far as how Jesus pursued, how he went after what was valuable. Number one, he set what he valued before him. It says, for the joy that was set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Joy. Joy, it's interesting. Joy is kind of an interesting thing to me. So it's part of the fruits of the Spirit, and that's a whole other conversation we could have. I had to cut that out because I didn't have time. Joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. What is joy? It doesn't say for happiness. It doesn't say for feeling good. It's joy. What is joy? Jesus set this joy before him. And what was his joy is a question worth asking. You know, why did he have this joy that was in front of him that he wanted to get through and that he went to the cross for? What was that joy? You could say that it's being at the right hand of the throne of God, that he was going back to the Father. And I think that there's probably truth to that. I think there's a lot of joy that probably we don't understand about that Jesus understands much better than us. Is that all that it is, though? I think, and I would submit to you, that the joy that Jesus had was that he knew that going to the cross would make a way for you. He knew, if I do this, then where I am, there ye may be also. That's a quote from John 14. He was preparing a place for us. So I think that's part of that whole joy that Jesus had. His joy was set before him. When we talk about what is most valuable, is what is most valuable set before you? Is it in front of you? Is every day, is that what you're looking at? Are you looking at what's most valuable? Or are we looking at all the other things? I think a lot of times we're looking at all the other things. But for Jesus, it was set before him. It was where he was headed. So, number one, Jesus set what he valued before him. Number two, Jesus endured the cross. For the joy that was set before him, Jesus endured the cross. Jesus was willing to go to that cross, and I think it's inextricably linked to that joy. We talked last week about carrying your cross, and so this is not necessarily a sequel to it, but I think the ideas are very, very closely involved. Jesus carried his cross. We all have to do things that we don't want to do. You know, I mean, that's just part of life. I think, you know, we struggle with that, but there's all kinds of things we don't want to do. This was one of those things. We talked about that, Jesus being in the garden last week, and he said, if there's any other way, and the answer to that was no, there is no other way. You have to do this. Jesus endured the cross. It involves patience. In verse 1, the writer urges us, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Endurance, patience. Those are two things that we don't talk about a lot, I think, because, you know, that's not what you see on social media. You know, you see a lot of other things on social media. You see a lot of other things in the news. Endurance and patience. That's what Jesus did. That's what characterized him as he endured that cross. Pursuing what's valuable and pursuing what's most valuable, I think, based on what we've been looking at, it looks a lot like carrying your cross. Last week we talked about that. Jesus said, carry your cross, follow me. Pursuing what's most valuable, I think if we're carrying our cross, we will be doing that. In summary, we talked about what values are. We talked about what is valuable. And then we talked, finally, about how to pursue what is most valuable. And we looked at Jesus as kind of like the example or the template of how to do that. I would encourage all of us, myself included, I would encourage us all, let's examine ourselves. What do we value? It's a question you don't get asked very much at all. What do you value? And once you've determined what you value, compare that with what is actually valuable. Answer that question. And we gave you some answers from the Christian perspective on that. And then when you've answered those two questions, pursue it. Pursue it. When it comes to life, don't settle for the overpriced hamburger. You know, there's the overpriced hamburger, the $100 hamburger. That's out there. You walk out the door and turn on the TV, get on the internet, you'll see a lot of overpriced hamburgers out there, and people will try to get you to buy them. A lot of people do. Jesus didn't settle for that. He didn't say that what isn't valuable is valuable. He pursued what is truly most valuable. Look to him. Find what is valuable. Find that joy that is set before you, that you can keep at the forefront of everything you go through. And then endure the cross. And in the end, if you do that, I think you'll discover one thing. And that one thing is that it is absolutely worth it. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I definitely have some things to examine from the questions that Jesse has put before us. Thank you so much for that, all the insight that you gave to your message today on what do you value. Please stand together with me, if you would, as we join together to sing our closing hymn. Praise to the Lord, the Almighty.
Praise
Thank you for all those that have been gathered in here today. Let us go forth with joy, knowing the true need and the value of what Jesus Christ means to each and every one of us. In his name we pray.